Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2025 Energy Update. I do this once a year, and I also recognize, too, that the Gregorian calendar and the astrological new year are two separate things, but the reason I do this is a little bit different. Recently on social media, we saw everybody saying Happy New Year's and all the party poopers coming out and saying, this isn't really New Year's. The astrological New Year begins on March 21st, and the month September is actually the 7th month, and October is actually the 8th month. And don't you NPCs know this? We're taking things a little bit too seriously, folks. I make these every year. I love this time of year for starting fresh. There is a thing to it, mostly for me because it's my personal solar return. This is my birthday time. So for me, I like to reassess what the year has been before and what the year looks like ahead. And I like to share my collective insights with you guys because, well, hey, I'm a reflector. So I'm tapped into what's going on just organically. And so any insights I have, I want to be able to share it with my friends that watch this channel. And I hope you get a lot out of this. There is something too with the January 1st date, by the way, because there's a collective thought form. You know, whenever we put our attention on something, it becomes somewhat real. In this video, we're going to basically be covering what 2025 brings in terms of two basically separate tracks, you could say. One, the synthetic time, and the other, the organic time. And I'm going to be giving some context for new people on synthetic time and organic time. It's different than this new age concept of the bifurcation, which is, I think, a little bit more polarizing. This concept is what I have found to be a bit more of a neutral, unbiased way to look at what's actually happening. So the other things we're going to be covering is what the collective energy has to say about the political landscape so that we can position ourselves accordingly, if and what the next big event could look like, and most importantly, what each of us can do to ensure that we're using the unique opportunities of the energy that this year brings. Because at the end of the day, this is not a prediction. What I'm saying here is not a prediction. It's an exploration of potentiality based on the energies that are play with the upcoming year. So before I go any further, though, I should actually talk a little bit about this idea of time, especially because it's a central theme for the coming year. I have really the feeling, this is like a strong feeling, and this is also mirrored by others I'm speaking to as well, that something is going to happen that's going to, again, either push people more in the direction of their purpose, natural law, and sovereignty, or more in the direction of, fear, control, and the whole bag of shenanigans that's been playing out for pretty much the whole 21st century, but especially the last 5 years or so. And over the past year, I've personally seen an initiation happening to many in the spiritual community where they're exposing many of the taken for granted fallacies that exist in the New Age community. And so what I'm getting at here is that this idea of synthetic time isn't just like some matrix where people are stuck in a 9-to-5 and they need to learn about rainbows and chakras and crystals and stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm actually talking about a multi-dimensional labyrinth, a synthetic carbon copy of all 7 density layers that exist in the creation that are tilted in an off-axis manner to be used as a control mechanism. I learned a long time ago that the spiritual dimensions doesn't necessarily equate to good. There is a whole hierarchy of off-axis spiritual dimensions that are quite inverted and distorted. And in the New Age itself, and that concept is, from the beginning, it was essentially a hijacked concept meant to create the last cul-de-sac before humanity hit the golden age. So the New Age is basically the multidimensional version of Matrix living. So Matrix living, or what people say is the 3D world, it really is the first 3 densities. And then the New Age is basically just keep on going off axis, keep on going on a synthetic basis, but adding density layers 4, 5, and 6 to the matter. So what it is it's people accessing the energetic, but essentially what they're creating is either black magic or harvesting for other non-physical beings. So it's basically ordinary life with a couple metaphysical perks. But from what I see, a lot of people who get caught up in spirituality in sort of a false light doctrine or in a naive way often create more problems for themselves through that process than anything else, because now they're playing with voltage that is twisted and distorted. And so the important thing to remember here is there is something else out there, which is the on axis. And this is basically when you're in the flow of creation itself, when you're being moved by the organic pulse of life and not hijacked by the downwarding spiral of death. These are very, very important to distinguish between, because the downwarding spiral of death often looks very pretty. It looks very glamorous, and it's meant to ensnare us into a well-laid trap that we don't realize we've stepped into until many years later sometimes. And so the year ahead is going to be another big year where the veil is going to be lifted. This is what the energies are saying, especially with the number of planets in Pisces in the first part of this year. You know, Pisces is illusion and delusion. And when you overdo that, when you have, planets like Jupiter moving through there and you have, or Jupiter forming aspects to these planets in Pisces, what you're going to end up getting is you're going to get an excess, and it's going to end up blowing up the delusion mechanism. And so, the difference between illusion or distortion-based spirituality and the truth of natural law is going to become more pronounced. It already has started, but it's going to hit a crescendo. And I really feel like the energies of 2025 are conducive to that happening. So you really have to understand that there is a major difference, a fundamental difference between the off-axis reality and the various levels of divine-infused creation. So off-axis reality, for instance, is what's described by things like tropical astrology, base 10 numerology, a lot of these spiritual systems that they kind of get us a hit of something at first, but they seem to create more problems. And, this is where you see people that always having to clear. People get addicted to their chosen spiritual modality, much like it's the difference between pharmaceutical drugs, which create dependency, and natural herbs and natural medicines that alleviate us. I'm not saying all pharmaceuticals are bad, by the way, but there are some that do cause dependencies, like some of the antidepressants. It's like you can't get off those easily. You're hooked for life. And that's kind of the same way that the off-axis version of spirituality gets you, is it keeps you out of sync with nature, out of sync with the organic creation, and into this hijacked multidimensional construct. And I'm not saying that this will happen 100%, but it feels like 2025 carries the possibility of another event intended to phase lock a large section of humanity into synthetic time, much like what we saw in 2020. And this isn't just me saying this. This is felt between many of the other, people that I'm friends with, that I follow, that I feel are really tapped into things. They realize that, hey, 2025, the currents here are pretty intense. We're not saying it's 100% going to happen, but another event similar to 2020, it might be in the same thread or it might be a different flavor, but nonetheless, the intention is to use fear to basically hijack people and lock them deeper into synthetic time. And we saw that in 2020, of course. Look at what transpired between 2020 and 2024, especially. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I saw during the election that told me that people are really, really hijacked majorly. Like, there's strong evidence of this, because on a biological level, they have bought into something that is doing that hijacking. And I think you can guess what I mean here. Alternatively, at the same time this happens, there is an opportunity for those that don't abide by the BS to not only root themselves further into organic time, but also prosper and become beacons of light for the influx of people migrating over to organic time. You see, any time that these divisive events occur, there's a lot of people that wake up. And so there's going to be a next wave and a wave after that of people that are coming over to the organic timeline. And so people that are authentic guides the authentic therapists and healers and leaders are going to find that there's more people interested in what they offer. I really feel that after 2025, like going into 2026, the spiritual community will not be marginalized and not be considered woo-woo anymore, that they will actually be much more prominent and they will be taken seriously because of the number of people that are going to wake up. Like you look around now, and the people that have not woken up right now, they're very jangled, they're very irritated, they're doubling down on their rational rhetoric because they know something is up, but they're not quite ready to face it. So a little bit more of a push will push them over the edge, so they'll have to face it and they'll have to make a decision. Do they double down again and buy into something that, again, phase locks them deeper into synthetic time, or did they make a different choice and they come into organic time? And why do I use time, by the way? They talk about the bifurcation in timelines, but time and space are the two-dimensional axes that make up creation. So space is density or dimensional aggregate levels 1 through 3, like 3D. And density levels 4 through 6 are functions of time. Density level 7 is unique in that it's the operating system or the logos that oversees how time and space unfold. So when I'm talking about this time, I'm really talking about causality. I'm talking about the causal factors, the factors that affect consciousness first before they become material representations. So time really depicts the non-material causality or spiritual flow that you end up in. I think of it like a great river of time. So when I see the sixth dimension, I see it, or sixth density level, I see it as a worm. And there's a beginning, an inception, and a becoming along that worm. And if you take a slice, a cross section at any point, it's like a snapshot. So it's kind of like those old movie reels we used to see where one slide is literally a scene. That's exactly how a timeline works. Now, when you become more conscious, you're able to jump between timelines and migrate between them. When you're less conscious, you're stuck on the timeline that you end up on. And that's going to very much reflect your karma. So if you have good karma and you're unconscious, you're just going to kind of go through life and ignorance is bliss. If you have bad karma or painful karma and you're ignorant, you're going to have a painful life and it's going to be fated. However, if you choose to make yourself more conscious, you then step into more of your multidimensional nature. And through stepping into your multidimensional nature, you're able to then decide the outcome of things. And it is possible. And I know, because I used to be in a Vedic, like traditional tantric school. So I met and I heard about some of these ancient yogis. I actually met a few of them. They were in their 90s and they could do strange things. But some of them claimed to basically go and live in caves and they would hold the fabric of reality together. They would prevent wars, they'd prevent diseases, they would prevent, large problems from happening because they're at such a level of consciousness where they're really guiding the timelines, not just for themselves, but for the collective at large. And so that is something that still happens. That was just an example in my awareness. I see this still today, though. Sometimes with the weather events, there's groups of us that get together and we actually redirect the weather events. We help Mother Nature detox properly and not detox irregularly into population zones. So this is really why I'm talking about time, because you want to direct yourself into a flow of time that has a positive outcome or becoming. Right? It's hard to see that because there's so much deception at play. Like I said, the downwarding death spiral often seduces you in, just have another drink. Why not come to the brothel with us? It'll be a great time. And in the end, though, it kind of lures you in. It's this addictive quality that essentially drags you down. Getting back to this idea of the great river of time, when we're in a current, we need to know if we're going to be swept to our doom off the edge of a waterfall or if the river is going to carry us to the fertile valleys of delight. Well, it really depends on the river, and then it depends on, if you've ever been whitewater rafting before, where you position yourself when you hit the rapids, because there will always be rapids on the great river of time. There's always going to be some turbulence, and you need to know how to navigate that so your boat doesn't smash into a rock. And the energy of this year is yet another fork in the road, a lot like 2020 was. And some will see it and know what to do. Others will react in bizarre ways and further entrench themselves into problematic situations. And when I say bizarre ways, it's basically fear responding through levels of technologically induced mind control based on pre-existing mind control and cognitive dissonance that's already been going on. So that's why the behavior is bizarre. And, now we have kids identifying as animals in school, and they bark and they get, walked around on leashes and stuff like that. This is very disturbing behavior, the kind of stuff we're seeing. And we have to remember, if you want to really see this thing in its full effect, we need to look at the younger generation, because those are the ones that are most susceptible to the latest levels of influence. The older generations and some of us, we're kind of set in our ways, right? So it's a little bit more difficult to change our minds about things and to erase the past with people who remember the past. So anyway, I want to move on now to the scene that we're coming in with. And I want to start off by saying that I am not politically biased, but I am going to comment on what's happened in the U.S. because in many ways the U.S. kind of sets the tone for the rest of the world. So Donald Trump, of course, is scheduled to become the president of the U.S. once again in just a couple weeks. I say scheduled because there's many people, politicians and hegemonical power brokers that vehemently oppose this appointment. So, we'll see if he actually becomes the president or not. And as a result, the chance of a scorched earth event is much higher than if Kamala had won the election. If Kamala Harris had gotten in, I think it would be less turbulent moving forward because there's a lot of establishment powers that support that particular party. And so, like I said, the U.S. still sets the tone for the global stage and the direction of the world, although the migration of influence is progressively heading east towards China and India, especially China. But India is also a runner-up, and India is also manufacturing a lot more now as China becomes much more industrialized and actually is moving out of the manufacturing game and into other forms of industry. Again, this is more relevant and prevalent on the synthetic timeline where globalized supply chains, political ideologies, and corporate institutions actually run the show. But those living on an organic timeline, or at least in a dual power capacity, will have their own form of resilience and be somewhat sheltered from what plays out here. So what I am, sensing with this energy update is a number of different things, a number of different forces that could play out. And if you recall back in 2020, we did have, of course, a pandemic, but then we also had wide-scale rioting that happened in the same year. And as witnessed during the aftermath of the U.S. election, people are quite ill and can be easily goaded into physical violence. The reactions that were witnessed, especially in those that didn't like Donald Trump. And I'm not saying all of the people, some of the people were very diplomatic about it, but there was some people that went into a toddler-like meltdown. And the response here, it was so over the top. To me, it really had the signature of mind control and over the top Stockholm syndrome-like response. And this really, there was a lot of compassion that I have for people that have been through this, because their response isn't necessarily their own. It's one thing to say, I don't like this man. I don't like what he stands for. I don't like his values. I don't like what he's done in the past or his policies. That is totally acceptable. It's another thing to have a total meltdown and start issuing open death threats against people on social media or anyone who, 70 million people in the country. That is, concerning, because those kind of people are potentially unhinged enough to cross the barrier and create violence or be goaded into violence. And I need to say this again, I am an observer in politics that strives to be objective in the energies, and I maintain no allegiance to either party, because ultimately there are significant forces behind all political parties that are moving humanity towards a biological digital convergence, and that is the thing we need to be aware of. We cannot trust any form of politics in the current form, as we've seen, because pretty much every single party across the world, they went along with a lot of the mandates and policies from 2020 that are now coming into question. They're being shown through studies and investigations, the danger of them, the ramifications of them. Of course, you won't hear a lot about this on mainstream media, but even some of these investigations are making their way onto mainstream media now. And like, for the record, if you want to merge with machines and be part of the Internet of Bodies and live an organic cybernetic life, that's cool. But at least have the opportunity to make a well-informed decision and not just go along under a hypnotic spell led by a crafty Pied Piper into a manipulative web of deceit. And that is the thing that's happening. And every time there's events, so there's major events, like what we saw in 2020, and potentially there's a caution of one happening this year. We need to be aware that these are powerful spell-like moments that entrain people and phase lock them further in their frequency into that synthetic timeline that ultimately leads to a biological digital convergence. And if you're wondering what this is about, I personally know where this path leads. It leads to becoming a species millions of years old that only realized too late what happens when it sacrificed itself for a couple digital perks. It lost its soul quanta source connection and now must predate on planets around the galaxy, feeding off of soul quanta of organic life in order to maintain its consciousness. This is a galactic issue. This is not limited to our planet. This has been going on for a long, long time. And I'll tell you where I found out about this from. This is, there's also a lot of people out there that are aware of it, although many of the stories carry other distortions or they carry polarized views of good and evil. But essentially what it is it's an experiment. It's trying to force time. It's ego that basically says, I'm the path of creation is too slow for me. And instead, I'm going to do things faster by inventing a faster solution. I'm going to time travel and location travel by creating digitality. Well, digitality, and especially when it interfaces directly with the biology, basically kills off the soul quanta as one becomes more and more digitized. Immortality, and they talked about this too, is being able to upload your consciousness to the cloud. This is one of these things that you see in tech magazines now. They're talking about how cool would that be? I think it would be absolutely horrific to do that. And this is one thing that I heard a long time ago, back in the early 2000s, from my mentor, he was saying that this is going to be happening. This, folks, is what we're up against. And the coming year will be one where we all remember when the records are made of this era in the 22nd century and beyond. My mentor told me this in person, that he came from the 36th century back to the 21st century because there was still missing information on what went down during this critical pivotal point in history. He's not here to change anything, merely to report back on some missing critical information, and as a secondary objective, to impart any pertinent wisdom to the borderline primates, aka the slowly getting it human species. We joke about this, but I mean, it's not really a joke. And I'm not saying everybody is. We just know that there's a lot of people out there that are very slow to get it. And there's those of us who are standing around saying, why can't they get it? Why can't they see violence is not the answer and trashing the environment is leading nowhere? And they don't have love in their hearts. So you might be just thinking right now that this stuff is, this is just life and the way that things play out. But future humanity will look back on this first half of the 21st century, especially the years 2020 to 2032, and wonder what on earth was going through their minds at that point in time. I got this message intuitively, and it was later confirmed by 3 independent sources. I knew that the year 2020, the year 2024 or 2025, and potentially 2027 and 2029 would be the most important flashpoints over the great transitional period on Earth. This thing that we're in right now, you might call it an apocalypse, you might call it a time of reckoning, a time of transition, a time of awakening, whatever you choose to call it. I've seen at least that it goes on until 2032, and at that point, we're going to collectively decide what direction the Earth takes. Now, we're currently, as I can read the energies, we're currently heading in the direction of a positive, favorable, organic outcome for Earth, with still a significant portion that's heading in a not so positive direction at all. With that said, this is not a time to let the guard down. It's sort of like you're in a election race, and the polls are saying you're ahead by 3 points. That's still a close race. So we need to say, okay, we're ahead in the polls, but we need to keep on guard. We can't let our guard down. And I kind of saw that around the time of November 19th when in tropical astrology Pluto entered Aquarius. I saw a lot of people celebrating, going, yay, it's over, we've won. And I'm like, no, you sillies, we've still got years left to basically be vigilant. And, there's no harm in being vigilant. If we have won, great. Our vigilance will confirm that. If we have not yet won, we don't want to be celebrating and taking it easy too early because, well, polls always change, just like in an election. Okay, so now we've got some context, long-winded context, I know, but there's a lot to talk about here. I'm going to be doing a lot around sort of Earth history, the mechanics of reality, the control mechanisms on not just on this planet, but galactically, from a perspective that's taken me 20 years to filter out distortions, misinformation, and to present it as cleanly and unbiasedly as possible. So that is coming, and I'm delivering some of this information now ahead of schedule to prepare you for that, because I think the truth needs to come out, and it's going to come out in many different arenas of life over the next few years. And part of my job is to relay things on a very high level, a very kind of large overview, a macroscopic perspective, rather than to get into the truth around the medical industry or something like that, which is also equally important, but should be handled by other people. Let's talk about what's happening with a play-by-play for this year. Specifically the first quarter, January through March. It's a time where Jupiter and Saturn square off, resulting in a tug of war between the truth that has been intuitively felt and is now coming to the forefront. The barrage of revelations will be hard to hold back and likely result in a recoil that may result in social unrest and economic decline. We can already see this just yesterday. Mark Zuckerberg came out and said, they're removing all the fact checkers and they're going to stop censoring posts on Facebook and Instagram. Now, nobody trusts him. Not a lot of people do, but we already saw people getting very angry saying, well, the right wing is going to now be able to spread their hate speech out there and this is a bad thing and blah, 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 blah. And you can see this, there's a lot of people that are very upset. And I also saw this with RFK going for the jugular of the pharmaceutical industry. Well, whether he delivers or not is yet to be seen, but people are very, very sick. And they know this. And when he starts talking about things that I've known as a hydrogeologist, I knew the fluoride in the groundwater was basically a bunch of industrial shenanigans. They were taking potassium fluoride that was a waste product, and now they're basically learning how to sell this to municipalities. So that there was a really sneaky maneuver that effectively caused a lot of harm, and he brought that up. He brought that into the mainstream, and people were either very happy, a lot of people were very happy, and some people were so ill that they basically said, well, does anyone know how to refluoridize my family's drinking water supply? And so when the truth comes out about how certain people were profiting off keeping other people ill, there will be a reckoning that occurs. At first, there's going to be a recoil, no doubt. At first, there's going to be, people in such disbelief in Stockholm syndrome that they're going to go, no, this can't be. I need the dangerous thing back. Another thing I heard was that people want to be stockpiling, with this potential ramifications of him coming in and going after the pharmaceutical industry. People want to be stockpiling that's concerning, especially because he's not getting rid of them. He's just bringing to light some of the things that have been concealed about this. So that's very Jupiter and Saturn squaring off. And the world of finance and economics runs off the comfortable illusion remaining place, and it doesn't like it to be disturbed. So the likelihood of markets remaining at all-time highs is actually quite low, because when this kind of stuff comes out and there's a reaction in the general public, I'd imagine to see a sharp correction in various asset classes that is quite likely. I'd say we're going to see a very sharp correction in the stocks and assets in cryptocurrencies. We're already starting to see that. I just think it's going to be fairly deep because, let's face it, the economy hasn't really recovered at a foundational level since 2008. It's just a big Ponzi scheme casino of money hiding in new places couched by derivatives. AI has helped to offset a major financial crash more than once, especially in 2022. I was really into cryptocurrency and assets at the time. And as I was studying the charts, I'm like, okay, it's going to crash right now. It's kind of the same pattern as 2008. And then it did something very different. And there was little weird anomalies I saw in the stock charts, such as very fast corrections in very liquid assets. So it would go up and then it would go down very quickly. And that told me that there was bots involved. So I think these bots are basically creating a cycle breaker. So they're prolonging the inevitability of deep corrections or crashes, which is basically why a lot of the financial forecasters of the past who've been doomsayers have been wrong, is because the game has changed. So let's just see if that holds and we can actually hold out on a financial crash. I don't think cycles apply like they used to in the economic system, but I do think we're in for a sharp correction at least. Whether that rebounds, the astrology does say in the later part of the year, the economy is looking a little bit more stable. So it could just be a temporary sharp crash for a few months and come back, or a sharp dip, I should say. I shouldn't even say crash. But I'm personally expecting a sharp correction, if not more, in the financial markets, which will take some of the wind out of the sails of the euphoric spending of high rollers. But this is a good thing because, when corrections happen, people get sober. They stop keeping themselves high on dopamine hits from making money, and the entrepreneurial solution fire starts to burn in the belly. So this is really where we see people say, okay, I took some of my profits before this thing, and now I'm going to apply these to real solutions. When the markets are roaring, everybody's sort of partying and they forget about what's really important a lot of the time. And I see this even in conscious circles. People who are normally very centered and conscious can get caught up in cryptocurrency, and then things sort of start to veer off a little bit from there. Another thing to note is the possibility of a narrative of cyber strikes and terrorism and social unrest during the first 3 months is also increased. I'm not saying it's going to happen. We already did see on New Year's, though, there were two. In the US, there were two terrorist events. In Germany, there was a very tragic one that happened. And it makes kind of sense that this would be pushed, because the next thing that the digital nobility or the technocrats are pushing for are digital IDs. That's the next play that wants to be rolled out right now. So get your ID and movements and data fully clocked by AI predictive algorithms. That's the next major wave. That's what we're seeing this in countries like Australia and Vietnam. And really, this is something that we need to be aware of. We need to be calling out. We need to be making sure that this doesn't go ahead, making sure that we're not buying into, this is going to keep me safe and it's more convenient to do it this way, because this is yet another major milestone in the direction of the biological digital convergence. Once your score is associated with your biometrics and you're tracked at every movement, are your thoughts really your own at that point? Or is reality kind of feeding back into a highly data-driven algorithm, echo chamber, Truman Show-like situation? It can be very mind-bending, which is why we need to really do our best to hold our values and stay organic, and don't go down these pathways, especially not out of fear, especially being not out of forced into this. And so any big event that happens is going to be a pretext to establish this. How do I know? Well, I have the playbook for the next 200 years because I've known the people that have come back from the future and told me this. And you might think it's BS, but their stories corroborated. And this is over a 20-year period, 3 different people from 3 different countries that didn't know each other, that I've sat with and talked to about this, or listened to them, I should say, in some cases. Some of them I know directly. And so all the chaos right now, when you understand this, when you have that playbook and you see where it's heading, it makes a ton of sense. And like I said, I'm kind of teasing this out because there's a lot of nuance to this, and I have to put it into a larger series on its own, which will be 100% freely available. I'm not doing this as part of my business. I'm doing this as a service to anybody that cares. Just getting it out there because people need to hear the story of how we got here, the story of how reality works from a multi-dimensional perspective, and how they can position themselves and liberate themselves. When you heal your worldview by hearing this information, everything becomes possible. Until your worldview is healed, though, you are going to be operating in a limited capacity because those distortions block your thinking. They keep you in some level of dogmatic or religious or submission to authority-based thinking. None of this is something to be fearful of, by the way. In fact, 2025 is really just a year about affirming your values and putting your money where your mouth is. The demand for untainted, locally produced organic food and supplies will go up. The demand for authenticity and connection will go way, way up. Property and land in nature, but not too remote, is going to go way, way up as well. In fact, if you're already in the slipstream of organic time, the seeds you've been sowing will be coming up for a harvest this year. Not the final harvest, but a significant one. There's going to be an up-leveling for those people that have been sowing seeds, going quietly, maybe not as fast as some of the people around them, but they're waiting. And a lot of these people I talk to, the up-and-comers, I'm sitting with them, they're clients of mine, they're other colleagues, and they're saying, I feel it coming. And I go, I feel it coming too. Because basically, the rest of the world is going to start to catch up to where you have already been, or at least have been operating at for some time. Your integrity and your values are finally going to be getting rewarded. On the contrary, the spiritual influencers and hotshot gurus will find that this year is where things just stop working for them. It already has. It's already stopped working for a lot of the internet marketing types. They're sitting around scratching their heads going like, how come we can't deceive people into buying our crappy products anymore? Because I used to do digital marketing and I'm on a lot of these newsletters and I'm listening to them complain about how hard it is now. And I'm saying this year was one of the most fulfilling years as an entrepreneur for me, as a doing what I do, as a coach, as a guide for others. As somebody who works as a therapist as well, it's been a very, very good year for me, not just financially, but also in the quality of interactions and the enjoyment that I've been getting out of working with people. And, that's because if you're in the organic slipstream, you will be taken care of. If you're in the synthetic one, you'll also be taken care of in a very different way. But if you're in between, if you're like, yeah, I'm kind of all about 5D love and light, but I'm going to use these manipulative tactics from the synthetic timeline, I'm going to try to blend them, you're going to be exposed. Things are going to start blowing up. Many of the spiritual influences I've seen have been having meltdowns, sometimes very public meltdowns, unable to sustain a thinly veiled facade. Internet marketers and gurus who used to make hundreds of thousands a month off of lizard brain marketing hacks were freaking out last year because their tactics weren't working, and this is continuing. I saw a lot of this, by the way, at the end of 2024, going into 2025. Some of them actually, turned their cheek and became very humble in the way that they expressed themselves. And you know what? Anybody who was deceptive in the past and atones for that and comes back humble and is sincere and authentic, I'll meet them with open arms. I'm not going to stay at odds with people based on their past if they fully are ready to atone. But also at the same time, I'm going to call out practices that I feel are disingenuous, misleading, deceitful, and ultimately cause harm. And businesses and people trying to do the same thing they've always done. So this is people who aren't necessarily trying to be deceptive or anything like that. They're just going off of whatever best practices they learn. They're also going to find it harder and harder to do so. So basically, this is where that fork in the road happens. It's like either you really go in the direction of, AI and getting super techie and, becoming really data driven. And that's not available for a lot of people, for the mass of humanity. That's more for big companies. Or you just actually turn around, eat some humble pie and become very authentic. After returning to Canada in late 2024, I saw the horror of the situation for the average person, the person on a salary, the career person whose paychecks barely budged as they watched house prices and rent double. They watch food prices skyrocket and basic amenities and activities become luxuries. I mean, to rent a car in some parts of Canada, it's $500 a day for a frickin' minivan. Like, that's not affordable. This is not just Canada's story, though. This is the entire Western world caught in the grip of hyperinflation as people struggle to keep up. Look at Germany. I don't know if you know anyone in Germany right now, but it's a very different Germany than I remember. And it's not better. I'll just say that. So the rules of the game just got tighter. And to continue, you must be properly resourced. It's time to resolve the last of your money blocks and get into a state of prosperity, because the default now is toxic. Cheap food and cheap living conditions will be granted for those who can't afford to pay for things. And there's going to be a subsidized living, a universal basic income, but it's not going to be with conditions that give you freedom, and it's not going to be harmonious for the organic human biology. This is where a lot of the testing and, the synthetic biological things will be happening. So if you want to have a clean, natural life, you need the resources to afford a clean, natural life. If you can't afford a pristine, clean life, don't worry. The intention is there, and the frequencies are increasing to offset a lot of the toxicity. All the lines in the sky, the weird weather, the stuff going into the food cannot keep up with the rate at which our DNA is being accelerated by the background changes. Do your best. And it's partially due to the fact that the event that caused all this started in 2012 and finalized in 2015. So more of this will be shared in the upcoming series, but what happened 10 years ago in 2015 is very relevant for now. It caused the powers that be to accelerate their plan, which meant that they're moving too fast, they're making mistakes, people are waking up. This was supposed to be a much longer, more gradual plan, and it was kind of in the bag up until about 2012. In any case, the future is wholly positive, and it really possesses a feeling of unlimited potential for those that can hold to their values and not be swayed by what happens on a global stage. 2025 is likely a year where other people will realize we're not in Kansas anymore, and that reality does not conform to the standards of materialistic science. The other thing I didn't talk about was, of course, the potentiality for staged visitors from somewhere else. That card, you could say, my understanding was that card will be played in a couple more years from now, but there's going to be potentially more sightings or more mysteries like we saw at the end of 2024 with the drones in New Jersey. We're definitely not in Kansas anymore. And people are going to be shaken from their, 3-4 billion people in the world are very religious, devoutly religious. They're going to have the religious foundation shaken. The rational, materialists are going to have their foundations shaken. And when people's foundations are shaken of something they're so bought into, the first stage is chaos. So the operating system behind this entire reality changed in 2015, which means that since that year, any attempt to assert a synthetic control narrative, it does come with a certain degree of exposure. So this is the thing that's waking people up, is that it's moving too fast, and that the probability machine that governs the outcomes that went from favoring the synthetic reality, it's now favoring the organically evolving logos, not the synthetic construct. So I call it that the head of the snake has been cut off. This is a larger discussion for future videos, but it means why people are waking up right now, and it means why people that are here of service are finding their gifts easier to bring into the world, bring forward, and they're being rewarded for things because the probability machine has changed in their favor. So if you'd like to go deeper for yourself and how you can position yourself, I have a very special offer for 2025. It's mostly to celebrate my solar return, but I'm doing a solar return for anybody who wants it this year. So there's a link to that in the description below. And over the next few months, my time on this channel will be dedicated to providing a natural law-based account of the mechanics of reality, a model of how the multidimensional construct works that I've been assembling carefully for 20 years. And this is really to help you heal your worldview, which is the foundation for living in organic time. And it's given freely because it's of great use and value at this time, and I think everybody should have access to it. If you want to get started before that and you haven't already, I've also got my free 3-day Reveal and Heal Your Core Wound, which is going to be very important for the upcoming year, because if that collective wound is still activated, you're going to be even more jangled when things hit the fan. And if you have remedied that and resolved that collective wound in yourself, you will be rather unscathed during the events that happen this year. And I can say I'm a little bit excited, slightly nervous, but here we are. Let's walk into this clear-eyed. Let's walk into this with a smile on our face, and hopefully we walk out of this year beaming with excitement, knowing that we're moving forward in the direction of a positive future, and that, you know, the hardships are starting to wane, and that we're really seeing now that the things that have lived in our heart, the weird world we were born into, that seems strange and sort of distorted, is diminishing as the new world that's always lived in our hearts comes into form more and more. So thank you all for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed this update. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Take care.